We're back. We've got the stream going again, just like we did in the summer. This is the Rich Report, bringing you the richest content across entertainment. My name is Cameron Richardson, and as you can tell, we've got a packed house for this. Sean Clark, Evan McNilia, Brendan Martin, and Michael Manny joining me today to discuss all the chaos that happened in the NFL yesterday. And we're going to talk about the national championship game tonight between Alabama and Georgia. But first off, gentlemen, it's Black Monday. Head coaches getting fired, and clearly the most shocking comes with the Miami Dolphins firing Brian Flores after the team went 9-8 this year, had a hard-fought win against the Patriots yesterday. But Brian Flores, obviously it wasn't good enough. This is a man that just 2 seasons ago took an 0-16 roster, and they went 5-11. 2020, this team goes 10-6 and just misses out on the playoffs. And this year they have another winning record, but apparently that's not good enough. Sean, we talked about this a little bit before we started, but I mean, just initial reaction. Does this make sense in any sort of way?
Look, I would love to be that guy that just defends the Miami Dolphins and say, you know what, this makes sense. But I'm sorry, I can't do that. There are 2 reasons why this is an atrocious decision by the Dolphins. First of all, he got the most out of his team. Cameron mentioned it. In 2019, they went from 0-16 roster and looked like one of the worst teams ever, and they finished the season 5-4. They had an 0-16 roster and went 5-11, including knocking the New England Patriots out of the number 2 seed, which basically gift wrapped the Kansas City Chiefs a AFC title. So Brian Flores has proven that he has gotten the most out of his players. That is what he's done. 2020, he took a 5-11 roster and went 10-6. This season was a little bit of a disappointment. But guess what? The Dolphins did not quit after starting 1-7, won 7 games in a row. Yes, they got destroyed by Tennessee and didn't make the playoffs. But to win 7 in a row after losing 7 in a row, that shows how much you have earned the respect of your players. That shows how much spirit you have instilled in your team. And that is rare in the NFL. You don't see teams play that hard after starting 1-7. Now, that leads to my second reason. The apparent reason for this firing was that Tua wasn't developing and the Dolphins did not have a clear future. How is that Brian Flores' fault? I don't understand how that is Brian Flores' fault. First of all, the head coach is responsible for way more than player development. This is true. You got assistants for a reason. Offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, that can be both. And defense on player development. You have defensive coordinators, which Brian Flores kind of is one. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the Dolphins defense one of the top units in the NFL? Yes. Brian Flores is not responsible for Tua's development, not just because he's the head coach, but he's a defensive coach. Matt Nagy was responsible for ruining Justin Fields because he was play designer, play caller, and is an offensive-oriented head coach. Matt Nagy deserves blame for that because of the kind of coach he is. But Brian Flores is a defensive coach, and the Dolphins have a good defense. It is up to the offensive staff for Tua's player development, not Brian Flores. So the fact that Flores is the only one getting blamed for this is disgusting, and I hope to dear God that Brian Flores gets another head coaching job elsewhere. Denver or the Raiders would be a great fit for him.
Does anyone have anything to add about Brian Flores, or is anyone defending the Dolphins here for maybe firing Brian Flores and that lack of development for Tua? You know, is it a head coach's responsibility to develop their quarterback, or is that up to, having 20, 25 assistant coaches on your team, a quarterback's coach, all that? Should they be the ones developing and taking responsibility for the lack of or the progressive development of their players, or does that come down to the head coach? Does the head coach take full responsibility?
I don't think the head coach takes full responsibility. But the head coach has to know he has a guy at quarterbacks coach or offensive coordinator who's kind of shepherding this quarterback along the way into development. So it's kind of tough to put all the blame on Brian Flores or any of it, because like Sean said, he's a defensive coach, and the Dolphins defense has massively overperformed to what I think most people would expect from them, especially where they're at as a franchise, developing still a young quarterback with the, as Cam said earlier, a hip of a 77-year-old. So it's just I don't know. I don't think you could put too much blame on Brian Flores, but also I'd love to be the Dolphins right now and just feel like I could fire a really good head coach. I want to see like who they have their sights on or who they've been talking to, because if you're firing B-Flow, one of the better coaches, a guy that's turned your team around from absolute dog, it's, you better have someone really notable coming up and available in the hiring process. But we'll see how this goes. I don't see a reason to let B-Flow go.
I was shocked when I read this news. I don't get it. I just don't get it. Brian Flores has been the best Miami Dolphins head coach of probably the last 2 decades. I mean, I don't know, Tony Sperano maybe. That's literally all I can think of. It's just like you guys are saying. He brought a roster that was supposed to be deliberately tanking. That was supposed to be one of the worst rosters of the past few decades. And it reminds me kind of this year's Lions, how they've fought for Dan Campbell so hard, is that they fought for Brian Flores hard, and they missed the playoffs last year. They finished 9-8 this year. That's not, of course, what they wanted, but it's just like you guys were saying. 7-game winning streak after just an abysmal start. And I don't know what Stephen Ross is thinking. Does he think he can woo Jim Harbaugh from Michigan, or what? Who is on the market that like realistically would be better than Brian Flores, than them just keeping Brian Flores?
I don't know. I think a lot of people tied the Dolphins to Jim Harbaugh immediately, but then they turned that down. Apparently, this is solely independent, but I'm not buying that in the slightest. So, Brenden, if the Dolphins are to take a different route, where do you see them leaning? If it's not Jim Harbaugh, where else are they going?
I mean, that's the real question. Is like when you look at the sort of the free agent head coaches now, the best head coach on the market is Brian Flores. And so, and obviously they're not going to go with him. So, I mean, the reports of Jim Harbaugh, I mean, that's what people would immediately draw to. I think that makes the most sense. But I think it's clear that Jim Harbaugh he's trying to, he's putting it out there that he wants to explore NFL options. But in reality, I think he's doing it just so he can get an extension at Michigan, especially when this is the most leverage that Harbaugh has had in that program ever since he's been there. This news certainly flabbergasted me too, and I can't point to a head coach out there or a potential head coach that could be better than Brian Flores. There obviously isn't a Bill Belichick out there that can just be found on, those don't grow on trees. It blows my mind. It's not like they're gonna go after Anthony Lynn. I don't know. I don't think that's gonna be an option. Yeah, I mean, you would ask everyone right now, the best head coach out there is Brian Flores. He's absolutely going to get a job somewhere else. I think every teams that also fire their coach today will be salivating at that. I'm sure he's already getting calls at this point, looking for interviews. But yeah, I couldn't tell you what coach the Dolphins could get. That would be an improvement.
Now, off topic from the NFL, but I just saw this come across my Twitter feed. But apparently, for after the 2022 season, Eric Almirola is hanging it up at Stewart-Haas Racing. He's done full-time racing after 2022. This will be his final season, which opens the door for Stewart-Haas Racing to find someone that can maybe win races consistently and not be automatic round of 16 elimination. But we'll save that for another day because we have too much Week 18 stuff to talk about. And obviously, the biggest talking point was that little Sunday night football game that happened between the Chargers and Raiders. Just epic stuff throughout. Regardless of the result, it would have been a fantastic game. Obviously, Evan and I had some stakes involved, but I ended up on the better end. Finally, the Raiders going to the playoffs, heading to Cincinnati now instead of a tie, which everyone was pushing for, that would have sent Las Vegas to Kansas City. But for my purposes, this was a much better result, and obviously a much better result for the Raiders. But apparently, and here's the thing, rookie coaching. We talked about it while we were watching the game. The Chargers going for it on 4th and 1 from their own 15 or whatever. And then Brandon Staley, for some reason, calling a timeout in overtime to force the Raiders' hands to extend their drive and, not just take a knee and send both teams to the playoffs. The Raiders say, you know what, forget that. We're going all the way for the win. And it set up a nice run by Josh Jacobs, set up a Daniel Carlson game-winning field goal. Evan, thank you for being a good sport about this, but just initial reaction, and does this come down to Brandon Staley just being a rookie coach and making some rookie mistakes last night?
I honestly think so. I think you can't blame anything other than him being a rookie head coach for the mistakes we've seen this year. We beat the Texans if we decided to kick field goals a few weeks ago and not rely on our heavily injured team. So, I mean, there's been a lot of stuff throughout the season leading up to this game mattering so much for us. But at the same time, going into that game, we were going to play aggressive. I just don't understand the play call from your own 20-yard line. Like, when the game's not out of reach, out of hand, and a punt could put you in good position to make a stop on defense. That's not a decision I could understand. And I know he's always looking at the numbers and stuff as a coach, but you got to have a feel for the game as well. All your decisions can't be based on stats and analytics. You have to have a feel for how your team's performing, who's on your roster, and who's going to be able to step up and make a play. And so, I think that was a dumb choice. And then calling the timeout in overtime was pretty much just egging on the Raiders to win the game. He said in his post-game presser that he wanted to get his run defense package in. And at that point, when they're trying to run out the game, why does it matter? Just make a tackle. Like, that's all we have to do. And, the Chargers do have one of the worst rush defenses and tackling defenses in the NFL. So I don't blame him for thinking that he wants to get his run defense in there. But you also have to pay attention to the situation in the game and realize that your opponent could take a tie here, and you're both good and both going to go to the playoffs. Instead, he calls the timeout. We kick the field goal, and or the Raiders kick the field goal. They make it, and I don't know. It's dumb mistakes, and I just hope that during the offseason, Staley has a good period of inner reflection on a lot of those key decisions he made throughout the season, and maybe he can eventually get to a place where he's able to pull from his analytics as well as having a better feel for the team in the game.
Now, Sean, you were just going crazy, I think, every minute of this game. You, Brenden, Michael were all just having a blast, having no stakes whatsoever. But just from a football fan perspective, obviously it's going to take a while for you to set in and, talk about all the great football games that have happened that you've witnessed. But, just initial reaction, where would this rank for you in terms of games you've watched, especially with the stakes and this being the last game of the regular season?
Yeah, this was easily one of the craziest NFL games I've ever seen. And just for transparency's sake, I've been watching the NFL since 2004. So, a long time. I have never really seen a game with that many twists and turns with the stakes at hand. And I don't think we will ever see again the situation where you have a tie that benefits both teams and another team would be screwed over. I think that situation and that scenario right there is what put this into the upper echelon of all-time NFL games. Because we may never see a situation again where a tie is mutually beneficial for both teams involved, and another team that isn't even playing in the game is the ultimate loser. That is one of the weirdest scenarios we will ever see. I don't know if we ever will again. And it was so many twists and turns throughout the game. We saw the Chargers looked like they're going to run away with the game in the second quarter because their offense couldn't be stopped. Then the Raiders took control, and then that was one of the craziest final drives I have ever seen. That was a 19-play drive that only took 2 minutes. Do we understand how insane that is? 19 plays in 2 minutes. And I believe every single one of those plays were pass attempts. And there were 3 scoring drives in overtime. 3 scoring drives. And we thought, oh my gosh, the Raiders are going to kneel out the clock. But the Chargers took a timeout. The Chargers eliminated themselves by doing that because one of the Raiders centers post-game said, oh yeah, we were going to take a knee. So it looked like the Steelers were going to be eliminated this morning. But the Chargers decided to take a timeout. And the Raiders, you know what? All right, well, let's go win this game. And that's what they did. There were so many twists and turns. The scenarios were otherworldly insane. This is the perfect way to end what has been a chaotic regular season. And I am so thankful that the last 6 weeks, this season has just been incredible. And yes, this is easily a top 5 regular season game that I have ever seen. You know, you look at 49ers and Seahawks season finale 2 years ago. That was pretty high up there as well. You have Ravens Browns from last year as well, which was also pretty insane. But no, with the scenarios, with the twists and turns, with the momentum shifts, with the high stakes, with the tie scenario, all that culminated into easily one of the most insane NFL games ever. And for someone like myself who didn't really have any stakes, although the Patriots playoff seeding was affected by this, I had an absolute blast. And especially had a blast watching it with a Chargers and a Raiders fan.
Now, Michael, put yourself in the shoes of Pittsburgh Steelers fans when they see the Raiders up 15 with 4 minutes to play. They think, oh, it's all good. You know, Raiders are gonna hold it down, and that's gonna be it. But nope, here comes back Justin Herbert with all of his talent, leading the Chargers on what was an epic comeback to send it to overtime. Now we're in overtime, and Pittsburgh fans are like, well, here we go. Now that clock's at 5 minutes. Chargers kick Raiders kick the field goal first. Chargers respond. Now there's like 2 minutes to play. You know, Chargers converting all these 4th downs to stay alive. It seemed like it was destiny for this game. Even for everybody, you know, saying, oh, well, they should just knee it the entire game and we have a 0-0 outcome. It was 32-32 with a minute 30 to play, and everyone was going, yes, just kneel it, Raiders, end this in a tie. Do not have Pittsburgh make the playoffs. And then Daniel Carlson does Daniel Carlson things. 5 for 5 night, by the way, he's really the main reason the Raiders are in the playoffs right now. Daniel Carlson, Derek Carr, like, he's doing the Warriors proud. He's a 3-point guard for quarterbacks. He's not scoring 6 points, 7 points. No, he's a 3-point guy mostly and not a touchdown guy. But Michael, when you see that ball go through by Daniel Carlson at the end, and if you're a Pittsburgh fan, you know, just what would the emotions be right now for Steelers fans, especially with how they won their game and it being Ben Roethlisberger's final regular season game, most likely. Just how do you live as a Yinzer after a day like that?
I can only imagine what Steeler Nation is feeling. I'll have to text my family and see how they're feeling because they were all Steeler fans. But it's remarkable that the Steelers were in play at all. It looked like a lot of this season that this was, you know, it was we all kind of knew this was Ben's last ride, and going into the back nine in the regular season, it didn't look like they were in play for the playoffs at all. It just kind of looked like they were going to finish a little under 500, and that was going to be that. But I think that the fact that they are in the playoffs at all, that they were in the conversation to clinch a playoff spot at all, is one of the most remarkable parts. And I can just only imagine what they must have been feeling, seeing that the most unlikely of scenarios, the teams tie, both of them go to the playoffs, and the Steelers are out to no fault of their own. And that very, very, very close. Almost came to pass, if not for a timeout. I can imagine that game took several years off of the city of Pittsburgh's life.
Now, there was also drama in the NFC as the NFC West needed to be decided between the Cardinals and Rams. Also, you had the 49ers playing for a playoff spot as well. And both the Rams and Cardinals chose to lose their games. The Rams in pretty dramatic fashion, while the Cardinals squandered one at home to Seattle. Brenden, when it comes to the Rams and losing to a team as hot as the 49ers are, we talked about last week when we did our Twitter spaces after week 17 that there could be a cause for concern for the Rams. But now you're going to enter the playoffs. What is that, on a 2-game losing streak now? Or did they win their game in week 17?
They beat the Ravens.
Yeah,
That's
the
right.
Ravens.
That was a close one. But, you lose to the 49ers. Now the 49ers are getting healthy. And had they been healthy the entire season, maybe we're looking at a potential division winner as well. But with the Rams entering the postseason with a loss and the Cardinals entering with a loss, now they got to play each other in the playoffs. Is there extreme cause for concern for Matthew Stafford, especially with that final throw to the interception at the end of the game, and then Matthew Stafford underthrowing Odell Beckham?
Yeah, there's a huge concern, not mainly because of who the opponent is. They're playing against a Cardinals team that I remember early in the season absolutely destroyed them. I believe in SoFi. So clearly, that's the main concern is who they have to play. And while they did end up winning the division, they won, but at what cost? It's they're having to play against the team that they're battling all year for. Yeah, that throw that was meant for OBJ at the end, that's extremely concerning. I don't know if, obviously you would hope that OBJ would come back and make a crazy play, but that's not his job. His job is to run the route and hope that his quarterback can get enough juice on the ball to make that completion. But yeah, there's a whole lot of concern. And, Matthew Stafford has become sort of this, high risk, high reward guy where he's going to make those big passes. He's going to put up 50-50 balls. And a lot of times they'll be off target. And other times there'll be great passes that change the momentum of the game entirely. It's certainly a huge concern. And I got to say props to the NFL for scheduling both those NFC West games at the same time so we can see all the chaos unfolding as it was happening. It seemed that, it seemed like it was in lockstep of, okay, the Rams would take control of their game and the Cardinals would lose control of their game, and then vice versa. It would always go back and forth. And it was certainly a great thing to see for the league. But yeah, if you're a Rams fan, I'm terrified about what this match could be because it can go either way. And the Cardinals have shown that they can come into SoFi and completely wreak havoc.
Now, Michael, the Cardinals fell to Seattle at home to not win the division, but still in the playoffs. What do you think is the biggest cause for concern for Arizona when they play the LA Rams Monday night? Yes, that is the Monday night game where people are going to be coming home from work tired, and it's a lot of crazy stuff. But I guess the NFL saw this as a prime Monday night game, I guess. But I would have preferred, I think most of us would have preferred, Sunday afternoon with Joe and Troy, or, Saturday afternoon even. But Monday night game, here we go. But entering for the Cardinals, what do you think is their biggest cause for concern?
Well, the Cardinals are coming into this game with the opposite of momentum. Since their bye week in week 12, they lost 4 of their final 6 games. That included losing to Detroit, losing to the Rams, losing to the Colts, and this loss to Seattle. It's Cliff Kingsbury, a bit known for his late season collapses in college at Texas Tech. He got in his 3rd year here in the desert. He got the team into the playoffs. That's not nothing, but late season collapse can't be excused. And something a little bit of cause for concern. James Conner came back, played well, but then exited again yesterday. So his health is definitely cause for concern because the offense of the Cardinals is a different animal when James Conner is healthy and when he's in the game. 15 touchdowns on the year. Nobody could have expected that from somebody coming in on a 1-year flyer deal. And not only that, the offense has been good but not great since DeAndre Hopkins went down. And if the team makes a further run in the playoffs, there's maybe a chance he comes back, but you can't bet on that because you don't know how far that's going to get. So in terms of biggest concern, it's the health of James Conner and really just the lack of momentum. They did. Brenden discussed this when he was talking. Yeah, they went in the SoFi and killed the Rams. They beat them for the first time since 2016. That's not nothing. And the Cardinals have been a tremendous team on the road this year. Just outstanding. So honestly, that's an advantage with how good of a road team they've been compared to at home at State Farm Stadium. But just the lack of momentum is, if you're a Cardinals fan, something that is certainly a cause for concern.
Now, I think the biggest cause of concern for the week was going back to the AFC. How about a team that was arguably one of the hottest during the second half of the season, bottling their playoff spot to the Jacksonville Jaguars? The Indianapolis Colts are not a playoff team. All they had to do was beat the worst team in the NFL without a head coach, sitting at 2-14. You got fans showing up wearing trash bags over their heads to protest the entire front office. And the Jaguars not only beat the Colts to eliminate them, but they blow them out of the water. Just how bad is that for a franchise when you've got a potential MVP candidate? Everyone talks about Frank Reich and Carson Wentz. That connection being back together was going to be fantastic. And just how bad Jacksonville's been all year. And you go and you get blown out. All you had to do was beat Jacksonville, and you couldn't do that. So, Sean, I ask you, did we overrate Carson Wentz coming to Indianapolis? Because everyone said this was a great move for Indianapolis. Put Frank Reich and Carson Wentz back together. All the problems are solved for Carson Wentz. But here we are, the Eagles. And we were all talking trash about Nick Sirianni as a hire. They're in the playoffs. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But Frank Reich and Carson Wentz, not in the playoffs. So how do you respond if you're Indianapolis? And just how bad is it for the franchise when they've got everyone they could possibly have and they go and squander their playoff hopes in Jacksonville?
So here's the thing. Everyone is roasting Carson Wentz about that loss, and he does deserve some of the blame. He had
some pretty bad interceptions there, buddy.
He did. He definitely did. But let's not say that Carson Wentz is the only one at fault here. What I said coming into the season is I look at the Colts as a whole, and they don't stand out to me at all. I said this before the first game happened, and I said week 1 they would get blown out by Seattle. Guess what? They got blown out by Seattle. The reason I was never high on the Colts until they blew out the Patriots on Saturday Night Football a few weeks ago is because their defense lacked talent outside of 2 players, Darius Leonard and DeForest Buckner. The receiving core is below average. Their offensive line is, while good, the tackles are a little bit shaky. Interior is really good. The exterior, not so much. The only reason that the Colts were in this position is because Jonathan Taylor played like an MVP. But Jonathan Taylor wasn't great the last 2 games. And what happened? They lost to 2 teams without head coaches. Okay? The Colts came off a Christmas win in the desert, and all they had to do was beat a team without a head coach. They couldn't do that twice. Now, one is way better than the other, obviously, but still. Carson Wentz is very erratic. He's Matthew Stafford, but even worse. That's the way Carson Wentz is now. But the defense got lit up by Trevor Lawrence, who has struggled mightily this season. In losses, Trevor Lawrence has thrown 17 interceptions. That's on average one per game of their 17-game schedule. The defense deserves a lot of blame as well. Jacksonville moved the ball at will in this game, putting the Colts in a pass-first situation. Yes, Carson Wentz made a lot of mistakes, but the defense put the Colts in a hole in the first place when they're a running team first. Let's not give the Colts defense a pass here just because Carson Wentz made some bad plays. The Colts defense deserves just as much blame as Carson Wentz does. The Colts need to start overhauling their roster a little bit because this is inexcusable. The fact that I was so low on them before the season and they still end up missing the playoffs, even with an MVP season, Jonathan Taylor, shows that you got a lot more issues than just Carson Wentz. That defense is below average. Your receiving core is also dreadfully below average. Honestly, bottom 5 receiving core in the league. I say the Jaguars have a better receiving core than the Colts because at least they have Marvin Jones. Just saying.
Kind of disrespectful to Michael Pittman, I guess. The guy had a great season, great second season, I'd say.
Outside of him, who do they have?
I think the team, while T.Y. Hilton's pretty old, I think they underutilized him because, yeah, he's coming off a couple injuries, but didn't seem like he was a part of their normal rotation, which seems strange with how much T.Y. Hilton's contributed to that franchise over the last decade. But Evan, Sean talks about a complete roster overhaul for a team that everyone talks about. They got Carson Wentz. They've got an MVP running back. They've got a couple receivers. Everyone talks about the great O-line. You got Darius Leonard. But do the Colts need to overhaul their roster?
I don't think they need to overhaul their roster to become a playoff team. I think not making the playoffs was an issue of play calling first and foremost. Jonathan Taylor carried the team through that late stretch of the season. In the last 2 games, he still averaged over 5 yards per carry and had a touchdown in, I believe, both games. But they only handed him the rock 20 times last week against the Raiders. And they only handed it to him 15 times against the Jaguars. You're going to be able to gash the Jaguars for big runs if you continue handing your bell cow the rock. You most likely win that game. So I'm kind of on the fence on whether or not it's a huge roster issue or whether or not they just need better offensive play calling. I think Frank Reich I'm not sure if he's the one calling the plays for the Colts, but I know he is the offensive guru that runs the offense for the Colts. So he needs to be able to be more innovative in what he does. And I don't know. The Colts do need one more receiver on offense, a weapon that can also be open opposite of Pittman when T.Y. Hilton's either having a slow day, He's up there in age. He's in his 30s now. You can't really expect those 1,000-yard, 90-catch seasons anymore out of him. So maybe one more target and to actually give their MVP the ball in clutch and key situations, I think is what the Colts need to do.
Now, Brenden, we've talked about coaches a little bit already, but when people saw Nick Sirianni was getting hired by the Philadelphia Eagles, everybody was panning this. It was not going to work out, but here the Eagles are. They're going to the playoffs. And look at some of these coaches that aren't in the playoffs. You got Robert Saleh with the Jets. You've got, we could say Brian Flores, but he's out. Matt Rule, 5-12 with the Panthers. Everyone really loved that hire. Kevin Stefanski, 8-9 with the Browns. They're not in the playoffs. And obviously, Frank Reich, all people we would say are much better fits for their teams than we all thought Nick Sirianni was going to be, because we thought the Eagles were probably going to win maybe 4 or 5 games this year and it was going to be an entire mess. But no, they're going to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the wild card next weekend. So, Brenden, I asked Evan this too when we did our Twitter spaces, but just how much of an apology do we owe Sirianni for, thinking, he was just going to be terrible in Philadelphia. He was going to be a one-and-done hire. Here they are. They're playoff bound.
Yeah, he certainly proved us all wrong. Now, we can still go after him for those early press conferences when he first got the hiring job, because they made him look like a clown, and understandably so. But the main crux of this, he was the offensive coordinator in India, I believe, before they hired him. So clearly this was a move to try and get to develop their young quarterback, Jalen Hurts. And with all the potential that Jalen Hurts had, it certainly came to fruition. Jalen Hurts finally had that breakout season in his first full season, mind you. Remember, he only got the starting gig in Philly last year at the very end of the year. So in his first full year, he certainly showed that he was worth that second round pick. But back to Sirianni, yeah, we do owe him a little bit of an apology. Obviously, the whole point of being a head coach is you got to do it for the long term. And you can point to that division being still, you got the Cowboys who've now run the division, but you can point to those other two teams not being great. You can point to the coaching staffs on those teams, but it's hard to make the playoffs no matter what your record, no matter what division you're in. And props to Sirianni and that organization for really turning the tide as quickly as they did. After they traded Wentz and let go of Doug Peterson, we thought, okay, they let both of them go, then it's clearly a tank job. And it seems like it's been the exact opposite. And huge respect to that organization and that team for fighting through all that.
Now, Michael, answer me this. Joe Judge is still a head coach in the NFL right now. Brian Flores is not. The Giants chose to tank a game in probably the worst way possible to the Washington football team on Sunday. I mean, going for it on running a quarterback sneak on 4th and 9 from their own 10 was quite the entertainment. But a loss, the optics don't look good for the NFL when a guy like Brian Flores, a black head coach, is out when he's really turned around that Miami Dolphins franchise that was bottom of the barrel before he came over. But no, Joe Judge is still a head coach, although they are meeting right now. Matt Rule, Carolina, reaffirmed that he's all good, even though he downgraded from last year. And especially everyone was all hyped about Sam Darnold coming over, including myself. But that turned out to be an epic failure. We talk about quarterback development, how Brian Flores may be the blame for Tua's shortcomings, but why does Matt Rule get reassurance for the shortcomings of Carolina this season?
I mean, you got me. Matt Rule was handed that huge contract when he was hired over from Baylor from New Panthers owner David Tepper. And not to speculate, but I can imagine that's got to be an expensive buyout if you get rid of Rule. And it's been tough the last 2 years. Christian McCaffrey hasn't been really that healthy the last 2 years. So that's a huge part of the Panthers offense gone. And at quarterback, it's been inconsistent. It's been Cam Newton, Sam Darnold, PJ Walker. Since Cam got originally hurt his shoulder before he left the first time, they haven't found that new starting quarterback. And the biggest part of their offense, their best player in Christian McCaffrey hasn't been healthy fully in 2 years. So Matt Rule has not had the results you're looking for in his first 2 years. I could see maybe they don't fire him just because of that ginormous contract they gave him, and they're giving him another chance. But really, him and Joe Judge both. There is no reason that both of them should still be head coaches when Brian Flores was just fired.
Yep. Sean or Evan, help me out here. Why does Matt Rule get reassurance from Carolina the day before their Week 18 game? They finished 5-12. Matt Rule, you're all good. And the Dolphins decide, you know what, Brian, you just aren't cut out to be a head coach.
Look, I'm very confused about this as well. Brian Flores is easily a top 10 head coach in this league, maybe even top 5, although I would have to really think if I would go that far. But the fact that I'll focus on the Giants here. The Giants are so dreadfully terrible over the last 2 months of the season. I was a little high on the Giants coming into the season because last year they actually had some promising signs. They had a top 10 defense. Their offense looked like they could show some signs of life if they improved their arsenal. Remember when they went into Seattle and won 17-12 with Colt McCoy. So I thought, okay, maybe there is something here. And I actually wrote about this for the site. I thought that the Giants had a really good draft Kadarius Toney is a difference maker with his speed, and Semi Ojulari actually had a good rookie season. Looked like a very promising prospect from Georgia. So I thought the Giants were going to be better, especially after they signed Kenny Golladay. But the biggest thing about the Giants is they don't have a quarterback. They literally do not have a quarterback. They also have a head coach who has no idea what he's doing. And here's what I'll say. I've hated this Joe Judge hire because guess what? He's another Belichick disciple. Yes, Belichick is the greatest coach of all time, but why don't Belichick disciples work? Because they try to beat Bill Belichick when there's only one Bill Belichick. And as a Patriots fan, I can tell you that the Patriots special teams has never really been exceptional outside of Matthew Slater. Matthew Slater has carried that unit for the last decade. That's the way it has been. Joe Judge should not have received credit for being the Patriots special teams coordinator when that really is Matthew Slater on the field. Okay, that's the way it is. Joe Judge is not fit to be a head coach. The fact that the Giants severely regressed from last season is asinine. The Giants should do a complete overhaul. Yes, Dave Gettleman's gone, so that is a promising prospect going forward. But you got to overhaul your entire coaching staff outside. Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, is good. And he should be possibly looked at to be elevated to head coach because Patrick Graham knows what he's doing and has a lot of respect. But my gosh, they need a quarterback. That should be priority number one in this NFL draft because Daniel Jones is not it. He's not it.
All right. Biggest playoff surprise. Now, we got a lot of routes we can go down here, but I'm going to start with you, Evan, then we'll go to Brenden, and then Sean and Michael will finish this off. But who, honestly, is the biggest surprise in the playoffs? We got a ton in the AFC. We've got a couple in the NFC that I think surprised some people, but overall, just Evan, who was the biggest surprise team to reach the playoffs?
I think I'm going to take the first and obvious one here, the Pittsburgh Steelers, because, it was Ben's last year. Even last year, Ben had shown regression in his arm talent, and the Steelers' offense was stagnant at times behind James Conner at running back. Najee Harris has brought an extra layer to that running game that in, receiving out of the backfield that they kind of needed to add on to their offense. And I think it's helped them a bit, but to get them to the playoffs while Ben Roethlisberger is still at quarterback, I think that's just surprising, shocking, beyond believable. At no point during the season when watching a Steelers game did I look at them and think, hey, this could be a playoff team. So I don't know, the fact that they kind of backdoor in because one of the teams loses on Sunday Night Football is kind of a crazy situation. I feel like the past few weeks we've been doing Big Ben's big send-off into retirement, but now here they are, and they got some postseason games to play for now. So I think props are due to Mike Tomlin because, never having a losing season and then getting all the way to, and then, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but the Steelers, I'm a little rusty, but I don't know. I'm going to say the Steelers are my biggest surprise in the playoffs.
Brenden.
Yeah, that's certainly a good one. I think we all were very surprised that Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers made it to the playoffs, but I think a lot of that goes with Mike Tomlin. We talked about the Eagles before, but I'm going to go with the team that clinched their playoff spot maybe about 10 or so hours ago, and that's the Las Vegas Raiders. Looking at what that organization has been through this entire year, early on in the season, firing their head coach that they signed to a 10-year, $100 million deal after some insane, leaked messages came out about him, and what his character was like, having to go through that process, which jogged out to the point where Gruden had eventually sued the NFL for that investigation, which was originally on the Washington football team, having to bring in an interim coach who is definitely should be at the very least a coach of the year candidate, and Rich Bisaccia, having to deal with all of that, obviously all the scrutiny that comes with those Raiders and how historic that organization has been and how they have underperformed. in the past decade, at the very least. Going through all that, and of course, at the very end of the season, losing an NFL legend who was intrinsically tied to that organization, in John Madden. That tribute that they had at the beginning of the game was great. If only we were able to see it live before the game instead of having commentators talk over it. But nonetheless, it was a very cool sight to see. I think the lighting of the torch that they have in Allegiant Stadium is beautiful, and just having to fight out and grit it out against an up and coming Chargers team with a very good young quarterback that is looking to be a very good quarterback for the next decade plus, to come out and win that game in the way they did. It's one of the best stories in the NFL in recent years, and all props go to that team fighting through it. Not to mention, losing your top wide receiver Henry Ruggs due to him unfortunately taking someone's life in a car accident where he was inebriated. Those sort of issues in that team, and especially when you move to Vegas, are very prominent. And that wasn't the only time that happened with that team. So fighting all that adversity, going through all those issues, and still using your top talent that you still had, and making the playoffs. And you have not a favorable matchup, but you got Cincinnati, which isn't the hardest matchup. It was either that or Kansas City. As good as Cincinnati is, that's still a winnable game for Las Vegas. And just being able to get to this point is insane. I would have certainly never expected it, especially after moving on from John Gruden.
Michael?
If I would say Vegas, and I definitely think that's a common pick, but I'm going to go with the Philadelphia Eagles. They didn't look like a playoff team at all in the first part of the year. They started the year 1-3, and we talked about this. Nick Sirianni, when he was first hired, he looked like he was way in over his head, just from his first press conferences in that first part of the year. But after they let go of Doug Peterson, after they let go of Carson Wentz, and that team just looked like a mess, just devoid of talent on the offense. And the defense, a lot of the stars in that defense are either gone, or in maybe like Fletcher Cox's case, they're getting up there in age. But with young first year head coach, rookie head coach, that was not a celebrated hire, I guess you could say, and a young quarterback in his first full year starting, I think that's a tremendous job by Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts to clinch a playoff berth in a year that nobody expected anything out of the Philadelphia Eagles. And if they win against Tampa or not, that's great, but it's almost like they're playing with house money. They have 3 first-round picks in this year's draft, so they're only going to get better whether they beat Tampa or not. So the Eagles, for as big of a mess as we thought they were going to be ahead of this year, they're ahead of schedule, and they're almost playing with house money at this point.
So obviously I would say the Eagles are the pretty obvious answer here, and there's a lot to be praised about the Eagles, but honestly, I'll have to say that the Patriots are the biggest surprise that hasn't been said left. I am honestly, even as a fan, genuinely surprised that they did make the postseason, because I thought that the Patriots were too limited when the season started, and I didn't think that Mac Jones had it in him yet to make the playoffs. And the way the Patriots finished the season was exactly what I was fearing before the season. They got ran by Miami during the Week 18 game, which makes it even weirder that they fired Brian Flores, because they finished their sweep of the Patriots. If you were to tell me coming into this season that the Patriots would get swept by the Dolphins and still make the playoffs, I wouldn't have believed you, because I thought that having to beat Miami to get to the playoffs would have been the biggest key there. But unfortunately for the Dolphins, they struggled starting 1-7. If they just win a couple more of those early season games, the Patriots may not be in this postseason. So I do think it's very surprising that they did make it. Yes, Mac Jones has been a little better than I thought, overcoming those offensive limitations. And the defense has obviously been pretty good as well. The Dolphins are literally paying Kyle Van Noy to play for the Patriots, which just shows how much control the Patriots have over the Dolphins and the Jets. Still, the Patriots are probably going to lose to the Buffalo Bills on Saturday. I'm already expecting it. I'm going to be realistic about it. But the fact that Mac Jones has led the Patriots to the playoffs in his first season is not something I was fully expecting, because I thought the Dolphins would be the second best team in the AFC East this season.
Now, we could talk about NFL all day, but we've got other stuff to talk about because we've got a national championship game tonight in what is a rematch of the not so closely contested SEC title game between Alabama and Georgia. You guessed it. But first off, we've had a big discussion and a big debate over the last couple of weeks about players opting out of their respective bowl games. And the biggest cause for concern, we could talk about Kenny Pickett with Pittsburgh and then that bowl game between Pittsburgh and Michigan State. But we had the Rose Bowl, an epic Rose Bowl between Utah and Ohio State that saw Jackson Smith and Jigba, right, wide receiver for Ohio State, have a historic day. But that came with no Chris Olave and no Garrett Wilson playing for the Buckeyes. Now, for me, in my opinion, it's one thing when it's okay, Ohio State didn't have a great season and they're playing in some bowl game before Christmas. You know, if you're expected to be a first, second round pick, okay, fine. You know, don't risk the injury. You know, you don't want to play in, you know, the Boca Raton Bowl, or you don't want to go to El Paso for the Sun Bowl. I get that. But we're talking about college football on the second biggest stage possible outside of the national title game, and that's the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. One of the best settings, arguably the most historic stadium for all of football in the entire world. And these two just go, you know what? Let me go get drafted by a team that went 5-12 this year in the NFL. That's going to be more rewarding to me than anything. And I get it. Go get your money. But at the same time, we get one opportunity to live. And Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson decided to say, you know what? On our own free will, we are not going to play on the biggest stage. If they're afraid of playing one game and that's on the biggest stage in all of college football, why on earth do I look at them and go, yep, they're ready to play in the NFL immediately? Evan, I know you have the biggest opinions when it comes to this, but I'm seriously asking. We all get one life to live. Why, just say, hey, I'm going to wait out, the next 4 months, and just sit around, do some stuff to prep for the draft, some camps and all that. But when it's the Rose Bowl, this isn't the Monarchy Car Care Bowl. This is not the Mystery Meat Bowl. This is the Rose Bowl we're talking about. And these two very good wide receivers said, you know what? No.
I just think that for the Rose Bowl to matter again, it's going to have to become part of the college football playoff. I respect the Rose Bowl in that it is a huge bowl game with massive tradition, and it's a beautiful thing and the most beautiful game in the world. But it's not college football playoffs. You're not playing for a national championship. If you're a wide receiver, you don't want to risk going out and tearing your ACL before entering the NFL draft. You tear your ACL and you don't recover from it the right way, you don't get your money from the NFL, and that's that. And you miss out on becoming generational, or you miss out on the generational wealth you could have had. So I understand the decision of some athletes who are a little more precautious, but at the same time, if you're not comfortable enough in your draft stock, you should be playing in these big bowl games. You should be playing in the Rose Bowl. You should be playing against these other top tier teams, or teams that are supposedly around your skill level, according to the bowl making committee, to improve your draft stock and to show you can compete with similar talent. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, and I think some guys can afford to sit, and I think some guys should definitely play to try and boost where they are viewed in the NFL view. But at the same time, it's a personal decision, and that's up to the players. And yes, they might have let their team down, but in the Ohio State case, they didn't lose. So did it really matter?
But I think it just comes to, forget the school. We heard all this bad stuff about Urban Meyer and his time. Terrible stuff. But my thing comes to, hey, you get this one opportunity to live. And again, I say, forget, the Monarchy Car Care Bowl and all those pre-Christmas bowl games. But this is like the biggest stage in all college football outside of not being in the national title game. And you willingly say no. I find that a little bit just insane to me. And I'm like, okay, is there dedication to football or is it dedication to getting paid? I think that's now sort of been, the lines have been blurred a little bit between both, because it's like these guys have been risking their bodies their entire lives. And all of a sudden they get to this stage and it's not about football anymore. It's about getting that fat paycheck. And then you sort of just phone it in the rest of the way. Some of them really do, I feel like. But why go through all that? You start maybe playing football when you're 5-6 years old. You play all these years and then you decide, you know what, I'm going to be really good to this point. But when I get to this point, that's it. You could be 22, 23 in the best shape of your life. You're not injured, but then you go, you know what, I'm going to pick and choose when I want to play in the integrity of just as a competitor, in the integrity of just competition in general. I think we've really blurred the lines between competition and entertainment, and also the love of the game versus just grabbing that paycheck. It's something that's going to bug me forever. I won't ever dog a player for it. I won't ever just be like, yes, I will never like this player again. But when it was something as big as the Rose Bowl, and especially with a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba, who was a great receiver during the year. I mean, Ohio State has some great receivers, but he took the spotlight that night, and that could have been Olave or Garrett Wilson. Just saying. But Brenden, what are your thoughts? You cover college athletics for NAU. You've seen, obviously NAU doesn't go to bowl games. They're in the FCS, not the FBS. But just what do you think about college athletes just choosing to opt out, especially in major events like the Rose Bowl?
I mean, it's a tough situation, and I think it's a case-by-case basis. Like you mentioned, if it's something like the Rose Bowl, which I think maybe means a little bit more to you and I as people who are from LA, I think that means a lot more to people in that area. And as nationally appreciated as it is, it certainly gets its crux from the Los Angeles and Southern California faithful, and I think it means more to us. And but despite that, the Rose Bowl is the Rose Bowl, and it is, like you mentioned, it is one of, if not the pinnacle bowl games of the season. So, if I were in this position, not only I wouldn't see it as a thing to skip, as something that something to preserve my body. I would see it as a way to showcase my talents, hopefully, and maybe improve my draft stock if that's where I was looking to end up. But then you look on the flip side of that, and you look at the Sugar Bowl, where you had an Ole Miss quarterback who was looking to be a first-round projected draft pick in Matt Corral, and he goes down immediately in the first quarter with what looked like a pretty significant injury, and that will certainly affect his draft. So, I think it would be ignorant of us to say that it won't, especially with how, maybe from what we hear a lot, is how lacking in the quarterback area this draft class is going to be. People may not want to take a shot on him. People may want to look elsewhere, and it's certainly going to affect his bottom line one way or another. But I do respect that. He said that he did not ever think about not playing that game. He said he didn't want to do that to his team, and that's something that I hope NFL teams look at when it comes to draft night. But I think it depends. Like, you look at these lists of these bowl names. I know I'll have to mention this. If you told me that after all the season I had to play in the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl, what? No, I'm sorry. It would have to be something that would still garner a lot of attention, and something like the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl may not be something that a lot of players may be willing to put their body on the line for. Just saying. Yes, it is an issue that I think the NCAA is going to have to look into, but you got to look at the flip side of this. You got to look at coaches. You're not hearing the same thing about coaches who leave their college teams in the middle of the season to go coach a bowl game for a different team in that same season. You're not hearing that same thing, and I think that's similarly an issue. I think as much as we love, coaches like Riley, it's more so of a thing where they leave their programs because the recruiting window opens as soon as essentially the regular season ends, which is an issue. It's an issue that coaches have to leave in order to think about rebuilding for the future before they really finish what they started with that team. And it certainly, I would imagine, rubs players the wrong way. So it's something that I think the entire college football landscape has to sort of revisit, whether it's changing the dates for official recruiting visits to happen. I know that's a long shot because recruiting is everything in college football. But they also need to figure out a way to make these bowl games more interesting because, like I said, Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl, you can go down the list of, bowl games that have sponsors attached at the very front of it. And it looks like they're selling out. And as a player, I it's hard to get behind that if why should the NCAA and these coaches who get signed to insane multi-million-dollar deals, why do they get to cash out while these players they don't get to reap those benefits even if they sit out a bowl game?
Now, for both Sean and Michael, I'll challenge you with this. Let's say a top NBA draft prospect like Chet Holmgren or Paolo Banchero, this year. What if they're the first domino to say, you know what? I'm foregoing March Madness for the NBA draft. Would the reactions be a lot more brutal than what we have for football players?
Yes. Now, coming out soon on the site, I actually addressed this in my opinion piece about this very subject. The reason why I feel like a lot of these college football players are opting out is because, I'm sorry, even the Rose Bowl is just a glorified exhibition game. And that's honest. And look, I am a Pac-12 guy. I am also somebody who loves the Rose Bowl as much as anybody. But let's be real here. The Rose Bowl does not win you a national championship. Kyle Hamilton and Kyron Williams for Notre Dame opted out of the Fiesta Bowl because that does not go for a championship. Unfortunately, with the way sports are nowadays, it is all about only two things: championships and money. That's it. And the reason why you don't see college basketball players opting out is because March Madness, 68 teams compete for a championship. College football, only 4 teams compete for a championship. And when you're not one of those 4, what does that game matter? And that's why I hate the college football playoff with only 4 teams, because it diminishes the Rose Bowl when it's not one of the
adopt the FCS playoff format. That's really the only decision the FBS has. If you want to stop players from opting out of bowl games, then okay, we're not going to have 66, 68 college football teams in 34 bowl games or whatever the count is. We're going straight to the FCS format, a great playoff format. We just saw the 8th seed of the FCS go to the national title game. Granted, they got blown out by the dynasty known as North Dakota State, but there's that opportunity that team, that one team that came to the playoffs ranked 8th in the college football playoff rankings, could make that run to the national title. And that's all we care about is, I relate it to, pro wrestling, even though it's, story based, everyone likes the chase for the title. It's satisfying when they win that title, but, it's never the same as when they are chasing that, because everyone's, really getting behind that one team. And you get behind that one team that makes the underdog run, it's great, and we haven't had that in college football, really. I mean, Michigan's probably the closest we've had. Michigan Cincinnati probably the closest we've had in the playoff format, really. But even still, I think Sean makes a good point where it's like it's only championships or money. But if we're gonna keep complaining about players opting out, then FBS, the NCAA's got to do something and say, you know what? Forget the bowl game format. We're going straight to the FCS format. And I still don't know why the NCAA hasn't looked at the FBS and go, you know what? Maybe we should have just the universal 16-team playoff format.
I couldn't agree more. We've had that discussion about just how great that format is. Yeah, Montana State, an 8th seed, who probably nobody expected to make it all the way, to the FCS national title game. Yeah, if maybe you want to look at that issue of players opting out of bowl games, I get it. When players do that, I get it. You don't want to risk your draft stock. I know my heart sank to the floor when Coral got hurt, because I was like, oh, was that a torn ACL? Did he tear an Achilles? Did he what? It looked serious. He was on, if I remember correctly, he was on crutches in the second half. So that'll affect his draft stock. So I respect it. I get why players do it. The Rose Bowl is, they don't call it the granddaddy of them all for nothing, or really any of the New Year's Six bowls. They're big deals, but that is the point. That it's not the national championship game. It's a bowl game. It's like an exhibition with pomp and circumstance, almost.
I guess
As great as the Rose Bowl is, and as great as the New Year's Six bowls that aren't the national title game that is kind of what they are. But it is still one of college football's greatest stages. So you can go either way when it comes to opting out. But when you get into that conversation, but FCS playoff format. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, Evan, I'll go back to you. I think it's the only reason why I challenged that whole, it's a glorified exhibition game, is that wasn't the mindset a decade ago when we had the BCS format. Everyone was like, I want to go to the Rose Bowl. I want to go to the Fiesta Bowl. I want to go to the Sugar, the Orange, the Combo, whatever it was. We looked at these games as, de facto national title games outside of the actual BCS national title game. We took these games seriously, and everyone wanted to tune in. But now all of a sudden, it's okay. That doesn't matter anymore. Even though you weren't playing for a national title, if you played in the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, whatever it was. But now here we are. Obviously, it's a new era, a new generation of players, a more, critical thinking type of athlete. But still, the argument is that, these bowl games, these big bowl games are just glorified exhibitions. But just 10 years ago, we definitely weren't saying that.
No, definitely. And I think that the introduction of the college football playoffs started this. I believe that all bowl games mattered before, because the BCS selection committee was just, let's not forget how crooked they were and how bad some of those national title games we ended up with were. But at the same time, what the BCS told you where you were playing mattered, because only 2 teams got the chance at the national title every year, and that was it. So it's difficult to say you want that format back, but bowl games, smaller bowl games and more bowl games mattered at the time, because that was it for every team. So and I don't see them going away from a playoff format. I think college football likes having the atmosphere of that many guys or having more teams competing for a championship at the end of the season. I just think in order for it to be viable, they have to go to the FCS format. And, I love the FCS format. I feel like it gives a lot of teams a good shot at winning. And we hadn't had a Cinderella run until Cincinnati, I'd say. You brought up Michigan, but I think Cincy is the bigger, crazier story, making it from the group of 5. So
yeah, I only said Michigan because they entered the season unranked, and nobody expected a guy like Jim Harbaugh, who's had his shortcomings already at Michigan. They had that epic win over Ohio State finally, but I don't think we came into this year going, yeah, Jim Harbaugh and Michigan, we're going to the playoff.
He got his pay cut before the season because he had been struggling, and I know that was a big storyline that was talked about through their run. But at the same time, bowl games need to matter again. And the only way for that to happen is to make more bowl games playoff games. And so until that happens, I don't think the NCAA is going to get the pull that they want from their athletes playing in these games. But the second that there's a 16-team playoff, you're going to have every starter from all 16 teams playing until the end of the season or until they get injured. And it'll create more real football in terms of full teams actually playing for something. And I think there is a chance that we could actually see some big upsets in the format that most people wouldn't expect in a 4-game playoff. The one's gonna usually beat the 4 in the 4-game playoff. But I think if you bring in 16 teams, there's a lot of opportunities for the one to get knocked off in there. So again, we want college football bowl games to matter again. I want bowl games to matter again. I want people playing in bowl games, but until there's a reason to do so, until they're playing for a championship in those games, it's not going to happen.
And finally, tonight we have the national title game, which, like I said, is a rematch of a very lopsided SEC title game between Georgia and Alabama. Kirby Smart, now 0-4 against Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide, his former team where he was the defensive coordinator. But here's what I will throw out. I will be the villain here and say, you know what? Who cares about this result? Because could Alabama just say tonight, if let's say they lose close tonight and say, you know what, congratulations, Kirby Smart in Georgia. Here's your charity win. Finally, congratulations. You finally beat us. It took you all these decades to finally defeat us and knock us off the top. That's one win versus the dozens we have against your program. Sean, I know, it's a national title game. It's the biggest game of the entire season, but we've already seen just a couple weeks ago Georgia get absolutely dominated by Bryce Young, and just a week before that SEC title game, Auburn nearly beat a bad Auburn team, one of the worst Auburn teams I've seen in my life, beat Alabama. Georgia could not beat that team 7 days later and got blown out. Here we are just a month later. Am I supposed to believe any differently that Kirby Smart stands a chance against Nick Saban in Alabama?
Here's the thing. This is, and I wrote about this in length when I previewed the SEC title game by breaking down Alabama and Georgia's history. You essentially have the Washington Capitals and Pittsburgh Penguins of college football. For multiple decades, the Penguins were eliminating the Capitals almost every single season. But finally, in 2018, the Capitals finally got over the hump and beat the Penguins in 6 games in the Eastern Conference semifinals. That was a monumental win for the Washington Capitals. And Cameron, I think you're wrong. I think that this result does completely matter. It doesn't ain't no charity win, because do you know who's watching this game? The recruits. Recruiting is everything in college football, right?
But we've already seen Alabama beat Georgia, and pretty handedly too. So you really think this is going to flip someone's decision?
Here's what I'll throw back at you. 2011, LSU beat Alabama. What happened in the national title game in a rematch? Alabama got the revenge and beat them soundly. If Georgia does the same thing, you don't think that the top recruits in the country are going to notice this? That Georgia finally can beat Alabama on the biggest stage, and maybe, just maybe, that Georgia can finally start to become the college football power, like Clemson. Deshaun Watson and Clemson beat Alabama, and look what happened. They got Trevor Lawrence in the town, and Trevor Lawrence led them to another national title.
You also got to remember the coaches we're working with here. You're talking about Nick Saban making adjustments against Les Miles in a span of a couple weeks versus Kirby Smart having to make adjustments against Nick Saban in the national title game. You really think that's a fair comparison?
But what if Kirby Smart gets it done, though?
I still can't and go, but I think look at Georgia overall as a program. We've always seen them as, second fiddle or even third to the entire SEC West, and especially Alabama. If it's just one win, granted it'd be a national title, but are people going to look at that one game and go, "Yep, Georgia is that program? They're the elite of the SEC," or is this going to be just a 1-year affair? I think regardless of the result, Georgia's still second fiddle to Alabama, because this is now one win in 5 meetings Kirby Smart's had as the head coach of Georgia against Alabama.
I struggle to see how that makes sense, because winning a national title, especially being Alabama, that's extremely difficult to do. Yes, it could be a one-year affair like LSU in 2019. But I'll also say at the same time, Georgia has consistently been one of the best recruiting teams in the country. And
what have they done with it? Tell me. Answer me that.
If they win tonight, you can't
This team
say
almost
that
lost
anymore.
to Cincinnati last year in what? The Peach Bowl?
Oh, come on. Well, that's a disrespect to Cincinnati, who made the college football playoff this year with basically the same team. But
You
yes,
see what Alabama did to Cincinnati?
Why does that matter?
Well, you said it was the same exact team, and we're comparing Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, are we not? Kirby Smart barely beat Cincinnati. Nick Saban blew him out.
Guess what, though? Alabama also blew out Georgia, but all that will be erased if Georgia gets it done. Do I think they will? Absolutely not. So this in the end is a very moot point because the only reason that I have to say is why Alabama win this game tonight is because Georgia does not have a good secondary, and Alabama has the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. I don't think I have to say any more to say why Alabama win tonight. All I'm saying is that Georgia would be a monumental win for the program if they win. They're just not going to get it done.
Michael, does all of Georgia's shortcomings, and not just with Kirby Smart, this is decades of shortcomings for Georgia. I mean, going back to Aaron Murray and all the years beforehand, does that all just get erased if they win this one game tonight?
I don't know if it gets erased, but it's certainly a monkey off their back. It's kind of just like years and years and years, like you said, Sean, the Capitals, and their misery of getting eliminated by the Penguins, or even like the Maple Leafs and all of their Bruins misery. But if Georgia's gonna beat Alabama, they haven't beaten Alabama since 2007. For perspective, I was in second grade in 2007. If Georgia's going to beat Alabama, they have a generational defense, one of the best of this generation. That defense needs to play like it's one of the best of this generation. So their recipe for success is they need to get pressure on Bryce Young. They had 0 sacks. They had 0 sacks in the SEC title game. Or sack total through the year. They averaged with looking at my list here, besides week 4 against Vanderbilt, they had 1 sack. But in every other game this season, they had at least 2 sacks. And there's somewhere they had Clemson. They had 7. Arkansas 4.5. Auburn 4. Tennessee 6. Georgia Tech 3. That's one of their recipes for success. Just as a team and as a defense is getting pressure on the quarterback, and they need to do that if they're going to have any shot of winning this game. And not only that, Stetson Bennett, he's played very well since JT Daniels went down. 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. There's in not only the SEC title game, but also in the Orange Bowl against Michigan. There was just a couple of throws that he made that made me just audibly go, "Oh my gosh, what a throw!" He's a talented quarterback, former walk-on, but he needs to play mistake-free football. He had 3 touchdowns against Alabama, but 2 interceptions as well. So if Georgia is going to have any shot in this game, they need to get pressure on the quarterback, and Stetson Bennett needs to play mistake-free football. Does that happen? Crazier things have happened. We just saw it last night in the NFL. Crazier things have happened, but I will believe that Georgia can beat Alabama when I see it. As unfortunate as that statement is, that's just the reality of just in college football. It's Nick Saban, the field.
Brenden, would you say overall, if Georgia wants to win this game tonight, they have to be willing to take risk and not play the football they're accustomed to? Are they going to have to rush more to get that pressure on Bryce Young? Is the offense going to have to take more shots than that, smash mouth, running up the gut offense that we've known Georgia for years now? Is that going to be the key for them tonight?
Yeah, I mean, you look at their entire season compared to just that one game in the SEC championship against Alabama, clearly something needs to change because they obviously can't do what they did in that game again, or else they're going to be in the exact same spot that they were in after that game. What boggles my mind is that somehow Georgia is still favored to win this game, as if we didn't see with our very own eyes what happened in that SEC championship game. But yeah, obviously they're going to have to make some adjustments because clearly it's not going to work against an Alabama team. As Michael said, it's Nick Saban and the field. And Georgia has completely run the table against the field, but they have not been able to do that against Nick Saban. So they're gonna have to definitely take some risks. It's all you're gonna have to. That's all you can do at this point is take some shots when even if they're not the same type of plays that you would run against a team that you're supposedly supposed to win. You're going against a team that is going to take those same shots and more likely did not have those risks come to fruition and be worth their while. So you're going to have to do something completely insane in order to pull this one off. But I don't think there's anything that Georgia can do at this point that can actually help them pull it off.
Evan, I have a simple question for you. Who's walking out victorious tonight? And if it is Georgia, how did they get it done?
I think it's Bama. I just there's no way you can stand behind Georgia after that beating they took in the SEC championship. And it doesn't make much sense to not be able to win your conference and then go on to win the national championship. It just doesn't compute. So, Alabama's
which is why we need criteria to make the college football playoff. If we're not going to have the FCS playoff format, there needs to be criteria. Even the FCS playoff format, you have criteria. If you're a conference champion, you get a higher seed. Oh, craziness. All right, final score predictions before we wrap this up. I'm going to say Alabama rolls on like they did in the SEC title game, and they win 34-14. Sean.
My score prediction is going to be Alabama is going to win 38-21.
Evan.
48-20. Alabama.
Brenden.
35-24 Bama.
And Michael.
35-17 Alabama.
So it's the consensus says that Alabama is going to be favored. It's unanimous. I think that's going to be the result. It'd be shocking to see otherwise, but even still, I'm on the side that congratulations, Georgia. You finally got your first win over Alabama in probably like 15 years or whatever it's been. That will do it for this edition, the return edition of the live stream of the Rich Report. We appreciate y'all for tuning in. If you did, we've got all of our Twitter @ linked in the chat. Make sure to subscribe on the Twitch, the YouTube, and go follow us on our social medias. Check out our website on Substack as well. Subscribe to the mailing list to know when we get all of our stuff published. We're back, and we've got class in less than an hour, so I'll see y'all in about an hour or so. But thank y'all for tuning in. We will see you on Wednesday for another episode.